Good evening, everyone. It's Carlos, aka CJ. I hope everyone's having a fantastic evening. It is Tuesday, October the 25th, and I'm very excited for tonight's interview. Tonight's interview is with James Sceniak. James is the Libertarian candidate for Indiana Senate. His bio, I'm going to be sharing with all the links to his site are currently up in the description of this video. So please do me a favor. Go to his website, bookmark it, learn more about James before I bring him on here in just a moment. But just to give you a little bit of background. So James grew up in a conservative family with 5 siblings in northern Indiana. He has a large family that taught him how to understand the importance of a strong community, which is a foundation of a lot of things that we talk about here on Rogue. Today, James serves as an autism behavior therapist. He uses his education to help his clients acclimate to their daily environments by building social skills and teaching them how to manage their behavior. So with that being said, James, welcome. How are you, sir?
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it. It's a good night, and it's getting close to the election, so I'm excited, and we're on the tail end of this, so putting a lot of effort into it. But
Yeah,
thank you
we're
for
super
having me.
close, James. We're super close. Here it is, literally less than a week and a half away from that magical Super Tuesday. And I went a little bit through your bio, James, but I probably didn't do it justice. Why don't you go ahead and do us a favor? Why don't you share a little bit more about yourself, James, and also why you're running for U.S. Senate, please?
Yeah, so a little bit about me. I grew up in Northern Indiana. I'm a lifelong Hoosier, and with that, I grew up in a very large family, very conservative family, and I was homeschooled and home educated, and part of the hands-on learning that my mom instilled in us was to do things very hands-on. So politics, she had us volunteer for campaigns. She had us go to grassroots movements and really get involved. And so I had an interest in this at a very early age. I went to college for human services because I always felt that I wanted to serve individuals in one way or another. And so I went to Bethel University, graduated, did some factory work, and then finally made it down to Indy and started working with kids with autism. And this is such a rewarding field. Behavior therapy, there's so many amazing things about it. You get to see a lot of rewards daily, as well as the long haul of what these kids do. So I get to see what happens when they push through obstacles. I get to see what happens when the community comes around them, and it's such a rewarding field to be in. But behavior therapy definitely applies to politics as well. Behavior is everything. Behavior is how you run your business. Behavior is how you understand criminal justice. And so when I was looking at possibility of running for office, I wanted to run as a libertarian because that's what I believe. That's the philosophy I believe in. And I wanted someone who was able to communicate the philosophy at the top of the ticket that really would be able to take it to the general public and translate it for them in a way that communicated what our philosophy is about.
Awesome. James, there's so many things I want to congratulate and thank you for. One of which, the first and the foremost, is running for Senate in Indiana. The second is the work that you do with children with autism. It's something that lies near and dear to my heart in terms of helping those individuals. And I know it is very much a caring type profession that you have. So hats off to you also for stepping up, being brave enough to put your name out there. The amount of time that it takes in this effort to run for Senate, in conjunction with that, having a full-time job, having a family, and having a second full-time job of running for U.S. Senate. James, let's jump into it. One of the things that I did preparing for this interview was to watch the recent debate that was held with yourself, with Todd Young, and I apologize, I forget the Democratic contender's name as well. But can you please specify and talk a little bit around the differences in terms of what your efforts are, your vision, and the contrast as it relates to the political establishment, please?
Yeah, so the debate specifically, I wanted to go into it with solutions and have really a civil conversation. Tom McDermott, the Democrat that was running, his whole strategy was an attack strategy, gloves off, but very little actual solutions. He's a one issue candidate. His one issue, I take that back, he's a two issue candidate. His first issue is abortion, and that's the main one he's running on. And then cannabis was very early on in his campaign, and that was another issue. But he just went hands off, but very little solutions. So he attacked Todd Young a lot on spending, but afterward, he said he'd do the exact same spending. So no solutions there. Todd Young was mostly on the defense. Very little actual policy that he went over. He basically was trying to respond to Tom McDermott's attacks, and then I was attempting in the middle to give Hoosier solutions, but there's only so much solutions you can give in 60 seconds. So the debate is a unique forum, and I'm proud to be on that debate stage. But really, when I present my solutions, I like forums like this a little bit more, where we can actually have real discussions with real people and talk about the issues.
Yeah, I completely agree. The latest voting in terms of the top issues as it relates to the majority of Americans, that and the top one, James, which is truly no surprise, is inflation. And in speaking to inflation, one of the misconceptions that was first around was that this is a transitory type inflation. It's going to be here. It's going to pass. And unfortunately, James, there's numerous factors that contribute to the inflation, not only to the logistics that you mentioned through the debate, but also primarily in terms of how the government is recklessly spending money. Recently, we just passed $30 trillion in terms of a national deficit. Why don't you share a little bit in regards to the libertarian principles and philosophy regarding spending, please?
Yeah. So first off, we are in a recession, despite what anybody tries to make it out to be. Uh, the Americans are feeling it. And I look to, for example, Allison in my home county where I was campaigning, and she's said, I'm living paycheck to paycheck. I feel it. The grocery bills are going up. I have to make decisions on what I can pay versus not. And so Hoosiers are feeling this. Americans are feeling it. And it's a very real issue. Now, what's causing this issue? We can directly correlate it to spending, the spending of Washington, D.C. And we look at the American dollar, for example, and really all they are is promises of something of worth. And so when the government overpromises, inflation happens because the market responds. So I'll give this example. My good friend Jeff Moore, he likes to talk about this as well, and I love this example that he gives because what happens is, let's say I have to move, and the neighbor promises that he's going to help me move this Saturday. But then I find out he promised 10 other individuals that he was also going to help them move. Well, he overpromised, and we all know that that is no longer of value. So that's exactly what's happening with the American dollar. They're overpromising its value, and the free market's responding to it. And that inflation is very real. It's a taxation on individuals, especially lower class individuals who really can't afford that inflation and the buying power of their dollar. So the real solution is to actually reduce the spending of Washington, D.C., to look for a balanced budget and to cut that waste in Washington. So we need better solutions. Our current incumbent in Indiana, Todd Young, is outspending Bernie Sanders, and there's no promise of it slowing down. He just went in with the CHIP Act, which is another transfer of wealth from individuals to a lucrative chip industry. So his spending habits is absolutely ridiculous. We need spending sanity in Washington, fiscal sanity in Washington D.C., and that's really what I want to represent.
Yeah, very well said. I think it's a huge misconception, and it's very unfortunate there's such a low lying target right now with the current administration. It's one of those things where you get the conservative side that's consistently punching holes in the current administration, but when you look at the vast amount of history and you look at the current establishment, whether it's Republican or Democrat, the national debt and currently where we are did not happen overnight, James. It did not happen overnight. Both parties have continuously, spent money. Yes, it's for different means in terms of different social programs, a little bit of contrast there. However, when you look at the amount of deficit spending that's occurred in the past 25, 30 years, it's driven around this belief that the government spending is helping the gross domestic product, the GDP, but yet it's contributing to the inflationary matters that we're currently realizing in real time. So yeah, I completely agree. I think in terms of dialing back the amount of spending that's taking place on the federal side of it, and almost if you take a look at it in the current state of matters in regards to companies and corporations, nearly everyone is looking at streamlining their efficiencies, streamlining their processes. But when you look at government, it's one of those vicious things that just continues to grow, continues to expand. What are your thoughts in terms of how do we dial back that size of government? How do we establish the check and balances that need to be established with their spending? It's a huge effort, James. So what are your thoughts in regards to how we can do that at the federal side?
Well, this is really why I love being a libertarian, because it's the only philosophy that reduces government size. The problem with the Democrats and Republicans both is that they look for government solutions to every single problem, which increases the size, it increases taxes, and it increases the intrusion on individual lives and individual freedoms. And so, really, the only way to approach this is to look for solutions that are outside of the government. If we want to reduce the government size, if we want to reduce taxes, if we want to create competition and more innovation, we have to look at free market solutions. We have to look at American solutions, innovation and inventions, and what we were known for in the beginning of America. So the philosophy there is we have to often go outside of the government. And something you pinpointed about the 20, 30 years of spending, the Democrats and the Republicans are both only against spending when the other side does it. So Todd Young, he's against spending when Biden's doing it, but yet when he's doing it, it's completely fine. So how do we pick which bills are actually contributing to inflation? The reality is we can't. All this spending is contributing to that, and both sides are just as guilty. So looking for ways to bring down the waste it's very complex, but I look at things like the penny plan, which really looks at each agency in a realistic way of reducing that by 1% every year for 5 years, and then you further it from there and see how much accountability we could really bring to some of these organizations. And this is the kind of common sense solutions that I believe Hoosiers are about, as well as Americans, and we want to see a more sustainable economy. And the problem is what our spending habits right now is doing is it's going to cost our children, it's going to cost our grandchildren, and we're just kicking the can down to them, which is very irresponsible of us now and very narrow-sighted. So we have to do something for future generations.
Correct. Yes. Yes. Versus increase spending on social and the belief that government can help stimulate the economy. Government can be the go to consistently versus saying, hey, you know what? Perhaps maybe lowering the tax rate on a certain class, lower income, middle people. Let's put some more money directly in the hands of Americans versus hey, the government's going to spend more money and we're going to also buy into that trickle down economics thing that's going to help eventually at the end of the day. But yet the middle class in America continues to be decimated by the higher inflation, the across the board, whether it's food, whether it's energy, the rising cost of borrowing money, whether it's housing, yet alone the rent rate. One of the things, let's pick on Todd Young for just a moment, because it's fairly easy to do nowadays, especially with his belief that I didn't contribute to the deficit at all, even though he signed off on a huge amount of that deficit spending the past 8 years of his tenure. I believe it's 8 years in the Senate. But one of the levels of disconnect that was very obvious to me, James, when he was speaking specifically around cannabis, and he said, it was almost hurtful in a way when he said it's one of those, it's a third tier type, focus of mine. It's not a one tier, it's not a second tier, it's a third tier type focus. Really, it's not on my radar. To me, that was a very significant uh, really not understanding of the industry of innovating industries, because when you look at some of the states that have legalized, James, you see a massive increase in, and not that I'm a fan of taxes, I want to make sure I'm clear with that, especially being here with you, a libertarian. I'm not a fan of taxes, I'm not going there. But what I'm saying is several states have been able to leverage and utilize the tax base, the tax revenue from cannabis to help in a lot of their social programs. So why don't you speak to that? Because I think that was a huge disconnect to me. It really was almost like a just a huge gap in his knowledge of really anything economic. So why don't you break that down in terms of what your thoughts are, and I know you probably done your research in regards to some of the states and the taxation. Again, let's repeat that. Not a fan of taxation, but it's helped in a numerous states with different social programs. Go ahead, James.
Absolutely. So cannabis, it is a driving force in the economy, and Todd Young is wrong on this issue on numerous um, for numerous reasons. The first is it's not a third tier issue to Americans, and it's not a third tier issue to Hoosiers. It's a very real issue that has broken up and targeted minority homes, and so we can talk about the economy of it, which I'll go further into, but also the criminal justice side. When we're dealing more than any other population or more than any other country by population, we really aren't in a free country. So cannabis is something we need to open up from the criminal justice side, but also from the economy side. The hemp industry, the CBD industry, all very blooming industries that we can utilize here in Indiana. Especially hemp farmers, we could definitely look at that. And one thing I would love to do is connect it with the RV industry. Hemp can be used for many things within the RV industry, and the RV industry drives northern Indiana, especially the Elkhart area. So, with cannabis and with this issue, I believe that economically we're going to be better off if you look at states like Colorado or California, who did provide for social programs through it. I prefer to tax it like an apple, but I also will meet other politicians where they're at. And if we can create a better economy with this, and some of that may be taxation, it's better to have cannabis legal than not. So, for multiple reasons. And so, again, the economy will thrive. Um, Criminal justice system will improve. And really, this is an issue that we need to understand from a federal perspective. But the banking industry is one that I would really like to address with this. And this is where the federal really comes in. So for those states that have it already legalized, transferring your money is very, very difficult because the federal banks don't have actually laws that allow them to transfer that wealth. And so the feds are still coming in and taking that money, which is just a gross um it's thievery is what it is. So that's another issue that we have to take care of on the federal level. And there's two easy ways to do this. One is the MORE Act, which Congress did pass, but the Senate dropped. I anticipated that happening. But the easier solution, and Biden's really failed on this because he just announced his one plan with federal possession charges, which is very, very few Americans who actually get a federal possession charge. Usually, possessions, uh, not a federal charge. But the reality is all he has to do is make the administrative move of taking it off the schedule, and that would be a huge step in the right direction. So many things we can do on this issue. It's not a third tier issue, as Todd Young likes to claim. Definitely can help drive our economy, and I believe it'll benefit Hoosiers and Americans.
Yeah, well, very well said. I mean, if you take a look at the current thought process in regards to greening our economy, and you mentioned hemp in particular, and the vast history that hemp has in our country, everything from the textiles to the different types of biofuels that could be established. We don't have to. There's a solution right there, right? There's a solution that is just waiting. We just have to put forth the technology to help move that forward. You also spoke in regards to the reform in the criminal justice system, which you witness several states that have been very no bail release. Some of these the crime rates that are currently basically just dismantling social things. And when you look at one factor that's contributing is whether it's New York, whether it's Illinois, it's these liberal policies. And I'm not saying that everyone should be locked up, but at the same time, there has to be some type of clear, and it's a top issue when you look across the board at voters in regards to what's happening in these cities. Chicago, which is close to us, and their crime rate, it's something to be considered. That if we could take cannabis off the radar of the law enforcement officers and allow them to focus more on violent crimes that are occurring, not the nonviolent crimes, and relates to cannabis possession, it could really help us, James.
Absolutely, we need to target real crime, and that you're right. That is crime that where we see victims at high murder rates in Chicago. Indianapolis is actually increasing quite a bit, and when we can look at that focus and redirect it towards making sure we create safer communities and looking at those violent crimes and addressing them in a very serious way, we definitely can do better with that criminal justice part. And uh, ultimately, I also believe cannabis legalizing it makes it safer for citizens as well as police officers because we're not enforcing something that um, it's a lot like alcohol, for example. When it was the wrong focus when we did prohibition with alcohol, and it actually killed tens of thousands of individuals. and now we see that result. But the same thing's happening with cannabis. So I look at it very much like alcohol, and I think we could refocus our attention to actual violent crime.
Yeah, very well said. Let's pivot for a moment, because one of the other issues that I thought would be one of the top issues among voters, however, isn't. But it's there's currently pending, I believe, on the next legislative side in regards to the midterms, and that's a funding that's currently being proposed right now, James, and that's an additional $30 billion to support Ukraine. And I want to get your thoughts on all the foreign intervention policies that have taken place. um, to me, it's such a huge disconnect in terms of the billions, and let's not even call it billions anymore. If you tally it up, it's probably well over $1 trillion plus that we've spent on all these type of foreign intervention policies that have really not yielded any type of results. We didn't learn anything from Afghanistan, James. We spent 25, 30 years there, trillions of dollars literally to vacate Afghanistan, to the point where we were watching planes take off with literally people hanging from those. Just talk to us, James, about the principles and the side of foreign intervention policies, and what your thoughts are on that, please.
Well, first, part of my libertarian philosophy and why I'm drawn so much to the libertarian philosophy is we're the only party of peace, and we look for diplomatic solutions wherever it's concerning. And if you listen to the debate, you heard me speak about how long we've been in war, and most of my life we've been at in some form of war. So Afghanistan definitely failed there, and Hoosiers and Americans are really exhausted and tired of seeing their brothers and sisters, their fathers and their mothers come home and absolutely devastated with PTSD. The mental side of it, we see high homeless rates among veterans, or among homeless, we see high rates of veterans, and then we also see high, very very high suicide rates, and this is affecting American people. And war is something that we have to take very with a heavy heart, and it's the last resort. It's the last action. It is Congress needs to take back its act of war. And whenever we intervene, that needs to be a Congress decision, and unlike what we're doing currently. And so, with the funding in Ukraine, I also look at that, and I believe that we're actually escalating war with that funding. We're I mean, it's definitely intervening in a way that is accelerating this war, and ultimately will not be good for the American people. So I do believe there are solutions, and those are diplomatic solutions. They're looking to our neighbors in the world and looking for ways to put pressure on Russia without the economic burden that we're currently doing. We don't even have the money to sustain our own economy. Why are we sending it to Ukraine? And that burden again is going to go on to future Americans. It's going to go on to our children and our children's children. Very narrow sighted. And so ultimately, I want us to come to the table. I want us to look for those diplomatic solutions. I believe war is like an iceberg, and we don't have to be the Titanic and stare right into it. We can avoid it at all costs, and that's where I come at from a senator. Diplomacy, it's a really lost art.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's unfortunate that most people, in terms of understanding peace, that peace doesn't necessarily yield the profits to certain institutions, that the government wants it to. So hence the reason why that these needless and endless spending just continues. I want to you mentioned the veterans and the homelessness among our veterans. Not only that, but in terms of the suicide rate that's occurring there, and it's truly tragic when you think of somebody who commits and sacrifices their livelihood, their family to serve our country, and then after their tenure, they leave the military. That we don't support that, and it's very unfortunate. I think one of those driving factors is in regards to healthcare and the massive amount of expenditures that are spent on healthcare. Not necessarily the expenditure, but the rising rates and inflation that's occurring. I've kind of changed my attitude, I guess you will, or my belief system in regards to healthcare. Kind of have changed a little bit the last several years, and primarily is because seeing how the inflation is in fact impacting healthcare. I think we recently got our most recent healthcare selections for heading into 2023, and we're looking at double-digit percentage increases. And it's very unfortunate that as the United States, we spend more per capita on healthcare than any other country, but yet we have some of the worst health outcomes and life expectancy. It shouldn't be that way, James. We live in a first world, nation, that we should be able to take a look at healthcare. You probably see this consistently on an everyday basis with your profession, looking at those shortcomings. I've experienced it myself, looking at the mass amount of money that I spend. Yet, whenever you go for some type of routine physical treatment or physical exam, that there's still dollars. So, how do we kind of like look at that in terms of a country and start to make meaningful change within our healthcare system? And not that I believe that we have to evolve into some type of universal healthcare. However, in stating that, I think healthcare should be one of those fundamental things that's looked at, that's not necessarily treated as a right in this country. It's one of those things that we do looking out for each other as far as humanity. I know that sounds big and far reaching, but what are your thoughts on healthcare in our country, and how can we kind of reform there, please?
No, this is a great question. And uh, it stems from we want to take care of our neighbors, and we want the best healthcare system. So you're right. When we're looking at the healthcare system as a whole and making sure our neighbors are taken care of. But the first part I want to address is the veterans issue and the veterans healthcare. I actually do have a plan for this. It's an original plan by my team and myself. It's called Vet Care, and this is addressing veteran care needs. I believe that we've really failed our veterans, and um, the promises of the Republicans and Democrats have not fixed their healthcare system, and so we look at a lot of those issues. And so, to open up their healthcare system, I looked at taking away the red tape, making sure that they can get better access to healthcare. So how I do that is lateral funding from the VA to something very similar to health savings account. It's called a Veterans Personal Care Account. And what it does is it allows them to go to whatever physician best meets their needs, whatever location is most convenient. And then it addresses some other issues. Long-term care addresses what I call the reverse boot camp, which basically we train individuals how to become soldiers, but then we need to give them the resources and tools to come back and have a successful civilian life, address their PTSD, address the questions coming back from war, especially overseas. So there's a lot to this program that I absolutely believe will improve veterans healthcare.
Yeah.
Now, when we're talking about just healthcare in general for the American people, there's also ways we can do a lot better for our system. And so you mentioned it that we actually spend a lot more than countries who have socialist healthcare, and our system is still failing as far as the expenses. And I hesitate to go to the doctor because of how much I have to pay out of pocket. Very real decisions. Do you need to go to the doctor for this or not? And those are hard decisions as Americans, but we can make medicine cheaper, and we do that by opening up the patent system. And someone wanted me to explain this question a little bit more, so I'll go into a little bit more detail right now. But with the patent system, medicine has become less competitive, and so what I encourage is these life-saving needs like um, insulin, for example. When a company makes their profit back, that patent then becomes open so that we can make medicine more competitive, cheaper, and more with a free market. And I believe that will actually benefit Americans in the long run. It'll drive down cost. And there is a lot of issues with red tape still. A nurse in northern Indiana emailed me about all the shortages of nursing, and that's a huge issue right now. We have labor shortages everywhere, but nursing is one of those fields. And she points to the red tape and how difficult it is. So I want to look at that, and I want to make sure that we're taking care of the employees in the healthcare system as well. So there are things we can do to better our healthcare system, and a lot of it isn't actually increasing the size of our healthcare system; it's making it more efficient and better.
Right. Yeah. It's a complex thing. It's not easy to navigate through. I really like your idea in regards to an account, a savings account that's leveraged for healthcare, that vets can leverage that. I think that's the least that we can do. Figure out how that works. I'd also like to see a little bit more of a proactive reward system for individuals who are healthy. Being proactive in regards to natural health care, finding solutions. And again, it's not an easy thing to do. It's not like we're going to be able to scale this back and one magical legislation is going to fix all of this. It's going to take some time, but more importantly, there has to be some middle ground established. And that's one of the things to me that the Libertarian Party does is consistently leverages, and it takes a look at not the far left, not necessarily the far right, but understanding that the adults need to enter the room at some point, begin some conversations, begin some dialogue, to make meaningful change for Americans that are going to help all of us, not individual interest, not corporations, not the funding to our political campaigns, but those are going to help Main Street versus Wall Street. It's just that important, James. So
Absolutely.
yeah, absolutely. But I do love that idea. I think that could definitely spark some conversation. James, when you are elected to U.S. Senate, one of the things I can talk about consistently is disrupting the political establishment, and I talk about disrupting a lot of things, disrupting the traditional banking system, tradition, and to me the politics is one of the large factors I think that needs to be there. And I think if you look at the growth of the Libertarian Party, when you look at the disconnect that a lot of Americans have, and national polling shows it, right? Trust in not only our media but also trust in our politicians. I think it's a very unique time. It's a very unique time for Libertarian candidates to make meaningful conversations to help people. So I want to forward you the opportunity, James, to share more about what your ideas are in terms of what you will bring if you are elected to U.S. Senate. So go for it. The platform is yours, James.
Yeah, so you're right. We need to have adults in the room, and I think even if you look at the debate, you realize how childish our politics have become. I mean, when a good debater is considered somebody who's just yelling at the other guy for spending too much, that shows the level we are at with our politics. And I believe in civil conversation. I believe coming to the table and looking for real solutions, looking to both sides, and being more centered approach, because I believe that's where most Americans are. I don't believe in the rhetoric of the far left or the far right. I believe that most Americans are somewhere in the middle and more freedom leaning. And so that's who I want to represent. What I tell people is actually electing a libertarian gives you, as Hoosiers and Americans, the most power, right? So a lot of people ask who I caucus with. Well, who I caucus with isn't important, because what's going to happen is it's who I can negotiate with. That's really important. And when we talk about the Senate and how closely it's often split, both sides are going to have to come to the Libertarian and say, we need your vote on this issue. Well, that gives the Libertarian voice the most influence within that bill to say, well, you're not going to get my vote unless A, B, C, and D. And so if Hoosiers elect a Libertarian, they will actually have the most power within the Senate, because both sides will need to come and negotiate with that vote. Something that's very, very important, and people don't understand and realize. They only talk about, oh, well, the Republicans are in control of the Senate now, or, oh, the Democrats are in control of the Senate. Well, let's put the people in control of the Senate and really have someone who wants to represent them. Um, that's how I believe politics should be done. I believe it should be done from a public servant's heart and mind, and that's how I want to do it.
No, very, very well said. And I firmly believe, like, I know that uh, everyone has great intentions, that they're running for office. They want to get to national level. They want to help, but there's something that happens, James. There's something that happens once they get to Washington D.C. Right? There's something that changes, where when they're running for office, they talk about reform. They talk about term limits. They talk about fiscal budgeting. But then for some reason, once they get to D.C., they sell their home back in their own states. They move to Washington D.C. and they're there. So there's meaningful change that we can make. James, do me a favor, if you could you please share with our listeners where they can learn more about you, your campaign, and also your site, your website information, please.
Yeah, definitely. Very active on Facebook and Twitter. On Facebook, you can find me at James Sceniak for USSenate.com, or Facebook. Twitter, it's Sceniak number 4 Senate. And then my website is www.sceniak4senate.com. And that's all spelled out. So 4 is spelled out in that. And right now, it's a grassroots movement. So I need you to tell your neighbors to vote and why the Libertarian candidate is the best option in this race. Definitely consider donating as well. We are still buying newspaper ads, and that's an important part of it. But we can't do this without Hoosiers and those who support me. I don't get funded by lobbyists. That's not something I'm about. And I believe that if we're going to do politics right, it has to be funded by the people for the people.
Exactly, exactly. James, I want to thank you very much for your time this evening, and for our listeners, do me a favor, go check out his website. It's one of those things that we actively talk about here at Rogue, is getting involved on a local level. It can bring forth meaningful change. So, James, thank you so much for this evening and a great interview. I look forward to watching your progress through the election, and take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. All right, there you have it, everyone. James Sceniak. James, again, you can follow his work. The links are in the description for his website and also his Facebook page. Again, it's one of the things that we consistently talk about here at Rogue, is getting involved and actively staying involved at the local level, looking at things that are happening here in our country. So, want to thank all of our listeners. Do me a favor before you leave. Jump over and hit that subscribe button if you have not done so yet, over to CJ Open Mic Cast. Also, you can follow my work over at Producer CJ1 on Twitter. Thank you so much for tuning in this evening, and we will be back tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So take care, everyone. Stay safe, and God bless.